Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hello there. Welcome. We'll get into it. It's 1 o'clock, so we'll start off the webinar now on time. So welcome to this. I suppose it's more of a kind of open discussion, really, with myself and David. So we'll get into the introductions in a second. We're going to kind of get across the subject or get around the subject of kind of what we don't know about online assessment and what people's experiences are. But we'll get into all of that in a second. Bit of webinar etiquette. So I've muted everyone, I think, except David. Can you say hello, David, so I can check I can hear you?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Rob.
Yeah, good. That's good, mate. Thank you. So yeah, please keep your microphones off. It's just a bit distracting if microphones come on and there's background noise coming from everywhere and we don't know where it is. So if you've got any questions, we'll try and pick them up through chat if that's all right. I've got the chat window here and we'll try and pick them up as we go. But it's not always possible. Sometimes we might get a bit distracted and not spot them immediately. So we have got a space at the end for questions if anyone's got any. So we'll use that space later on. Through this, we've got some polls as well. So we've got a few questions, and really that's to kind of give us an opportunity to kind of share experiences between the audience and kind of get a bit more insight as to what's going on out there in the vet space. So please get involved with those and answer those questions as we go along, and hopefully that will fuel some better discussion and better debate as we go through. Today's session is scheduled for 45 minutes. I don't expect to go over that, to be honest. May even be a little bit shorter, but we'll just see how carried away we get and go from there, I guess. So without any further ado, I'll just take the time to introduce myself. I'm Rob Bright from Cloud Assess. I'm not going to spend too much time there, but I'm very pleased today to be able to introduce David Garner. And David's got a wealth of experience in the vet space. He's worked in RTOs for a number of years, way back when, and then come through the Department of Education again for a number of years. More recently with the regulator in ASQA. I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of that. And now he's in life after ASQA and on the other side and working out in the vet space. David, hi, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Rob. I'm really glad to be here. It's a topic dear to obviously quite a lot of people's hearts, judging by the number of people you've got joining us today. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it should be good. Should be good, I think. And just for my benefit and the benefit of the audience, what you're up to these days, what you're doing now since you've moved on from ASQA and took the leap into the other side, I guess. What's your current landscape looking like?
Yeah, I guess some would say I've joined the dark side. I like to think of it as I've left the dark side, perhaps. So I've been doing consultancy work for the past 12 months or so. You set up our business as Consult DG, and some contact details will pop up later if you're interested in talking further. Just a small business operating from the Gold Coast, but working across the country. Provide a range of consultancy advice, development and research services across the sector. Things were a bit slow in the last part of last year, and I actually ended up taking on a part-time role with an RTO, helping them to manage their operations and get better at doing things. So doing a bit of a dual role at the moment, and that's been really interesting to actually get back into seeing a provider from the inside. And while I've always had a mind for and an eye on the challenges that providers face in this space, which is just about the most complicated business anyone could choose to be in, it is really good to get back into the guts of things and really start to remember what it was like to actually be in the middle of a provider. So I've been busy, that's for sure.
That's good. That's a good problem to have. It's quite interesting that you're on not just on the consulting side, but also literally on the coalface now. So I think obviously, in a vocational sense, we'd call that currency, I suppose, wouldn't we? In maintaining currency and your hands on the tools. But having worked in consulting in the past, you know, there's a lot of consultants that don't get hands on and don't get kind of roll their sleeves up and get their hands dirty. So it's good to see you literally in the front line on the coalface and getting into some of the nitty gritty rather than just perhaps providing advice and standing back and as some consultants do.
Yeah, well, I do think it's important to keep in touch with the industry. It's a difficult thing to do when you're working within a regulator, but yeah, really happy to be back at the coalface, as you said, and I guess, yeah, as you say, relearning my skills and building up some currency in the industry about the real challenges that providers face rather than the theoretical challenges or what I might look like from the outside.
Have there been any surprises in that experience, or kind of, you know, I guess I'm kind of likening it to having a second child. You know, you look back with rose tinted glasses and your second baby arrives and you go, oh God, I've forgotten about the sleepless nights and I've forgotten about the stress and this, then that and the other. Was it a bit of an experience like that, a bit of a wake up, or have things changed in the industry since you were last there? Or
I don't think very much has changed, to be quite honest. No, but it's been an interesting exercise. So just last week I was over in Perth doing, among other things, attending a graduation ceremony for the RTO that I work for. And that was a really great experience for me. It's been a long time since I've kind of seen the outcomes of students in that very direct way, and I really enjoyed seeing all those students parading across the stage and getting their certificates and taking all the pictures and how happy they were, and that's, I think, something that I guess I didn't realize I missed, is that that real personal connection with the students of the sector.
yeah, I can relate. I think we all, you know, anyone who's passionate about this space probably gets in the vet space because they're passionate about having an opportunity to change people's lives and to develop people, and I guess with the busy lives and the focus on compliance and operations, we kind of transition away from that and kind of focus more on moving paperwork around and keeping processes tight. So it's a nice observation, really, or a nice thing to get back to and feel connected to again.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, fantastic. Well, we have got some technology to enable us to do some polls. So we'll start by testing that technology and making sure it works before we get into the whole webinar. So we will get on to slide one and just give it a test out and just see who we've got in the room today. So I've called it Who's Who in the Zoo, but hopefully everyone understands my terminology and we can get a bit of a feel for who's in the room and who we're talking to. So we've got 95 people in the room, which is good. There's still, there was probably about double that registered. So maybe people are waiting to receive the video and the transcripts and whatnot of what we go through today. Just up to 65, 66 of the people in the room, 70%. Okay, let's give it 10 more seconds. We're at 78%. All right. So that's nearly 80% of the people in the room have voted. That's 80%, bang on. Let's see. So I should be able to end this and share the results. So hopefully everyone can see that now. Can you see that, David? Well, I think we've muted you. I'll ask to unmute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I muted myself and then realized I couldn't unmute myself.
All right. There we go.
Yeah, yes, I can see that. It's really good to see so many trainers and assessors here. It's good to see that they're, I guess, developing and learning new things, and hopefully they've got a lot to add. They're the ones that actually know what's going on in this space. So it'd be interesting to hear from some of those people a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. So thanks for that, everyone. We'll keep marching on. So today we're just going to kind of follow a bit of a discussion format, as you know, David, just for the benefit of those in the audience who haven't been to one of these sessions before. But we're really going to, talk about the online space and kind of what it's all about, and get a feel for the level of adoption we've got from the people in the audience, and kind of get a feel for the sort of technology that people are using. And then we're going to talk about recent trends that probably you more than I have observed through your experience and recent contacts with industry, David, and ask the audience as well what some of those experiences have been. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of the online space, and again, we're going to see what sort of experiences the audience has had in that regard, and then we're going to kind of bridge the subject to the future of vet and amongst other things, see how that goes. So without any further ado, we'll get on to some of these online dynamics, and it's not specific about the vet industry, but and I've used this this slide before, or this information before, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. For Cloud Assess, we certainly released or recognized the opportunity sort of 10 years ago when smartphones were relatively new and tablets were new, and there was certainly kind of a shift in demographics in terms of who was using this technology, and also just the nature of the interfaces, I think, significantly changed how easy it was to engage with this technology. And people who traditionally may have struggled or may have been reluctant to engage with a computer, a laptop, or PC, in very kind of typical demographics for the vocational learner base, suddenly we're walking around with a computer in their pocket, a smartphone in their pocket, whether that's someone doing home banking, sharing photos with friends on social media, planning events or to-do lists or whatever it might be. We don't think of it so much as a computer anymore. We call it a phone, but it does so much more than that. And interesting nonetheless, I think we're seeing what surprised me on this chart is really, the number that own a smartphone. Well, millennials, I would have always expected to be way ahead of other generations, but Generation X and even the silent generation at the other end of the scale are really catching up or virtually on a par with those millennials in terms with a smartphone. And even again, when we see on a tablet computer, there's virtually no difference between the Gen X, the boomers, and the millennials in terms of how many people own a tablet or a tablet-based computer. And everyone's getting more and more on social media than we've ever seen before. And probably the millennials are probably starting to use it a bit less and kind of gravitating towards other technologies. Is there anything that kind of surprised you on those charts, David, or is there anything that you kind of would like to draw as a conclusion on there?
No, nothing particularly surprised me. I do agree that the millennials particularly, we will start to see that graph drop down in the use of social media, or at least the use of the social media that all the rest of us use and understand. They probably tend to be early adopters, but also early departers, in the sense that moving on to something new and shiny, where the rest of us stay behind with something familiar. I did say I was a little bit surprised to see that drop down in the use of tablets. I actually would have thought that would have continued to go up, but I guess that the increase in the size of phones and the capability of phones perhaps explains that.
Yeah, and I think, since 2013, well, that's only 2018 to now, I think tablets were very new, very novel. People are probably getting more familiar with how they might use a tablet. They might just use it for browsing the internet when they're sat in the lounge room at home. But in terms of a business device, maybe a more suitable all-round device is a laptop these days. And with the price of laptops, I guess, coming down, and some of the technology that's available there, then Chromebooks and things like that, maybe there's just more cost-effective ways of kind of connecting with that sort of information that you'd access. But yeah, unfortunately, I haven't got more information behind this to back it up. So I just thought it was interesting information nonetheless. So in terms of technology that we see out there in a vocational space, you know, and love it or hate it, you know, there's all sorts of technology that's available to help us with assessment. And I know digital PDFs are a bit of a bugbear of yourself, David, but there's a kind of a range of technology that RTOs can use, and we see a range of solutions in place with prospects or clients we onboard that they're, you know, moving to a more aligned solution for their requirements, you know. And the number of clients that are on paper these days and purely on paper, or the number of prospects that are purely on paper, is very few these days. You know, it's probably 5 to 10% of RTOs seem to be still in that pure paper space. But, you know, 8-9 years ago, it was pretty much every RTO we were speaking to were using the majority paper. But there's a range of technology. You know, you might be, rather than using the paper, you might be using an electronic document or a Word document and using a digital transfer process. So that might be an email, or it might be a Dropbox or something like that. There's a download upload process where you might be literally uploading a document to a portal of some sort, or you might be filling in a form and uploading that handwritten form, a scan of that form into kind of a Moodle platform or something like that. And that might be a typical kind of download upload technology, because you maybe can't do practical observations or something like that. Electronic embedded is a term we've kind of coined to describe where you might have an embedded form in a process. So the responses are actually gathered individually, and sections are designed into a kind of slicker process. So examples of basic kind of functionality there might be Google Forms, or electronic PDFs that you might have hosted somewhere, or you might even have these things built onto your website. The learner journey integrated step there is kind of to paint a picture of something or an experience where a learner would actually be taken through a journey or an experience. So, you know, they're literally going to be connecting with a course and taken through a course and introduced to different stages of that course as they go through. So from start to finish, they're kind of going through a process there. And fit for purpose, I guess, from my perspective, means, you know, you've got that strong and rich alignment to the vocational space. So, you know, you've got, you know, your document retention, your reporting, your revision controls, you know, maybe you've got messaging functions and calendar functions, but it's really tuned towards what the vocational requirements are. Just going to throw the next poll out to the audience now before we kind of discuss the results on there. So let's see if we can't fire that out to everyone and say, out of those different steps that we kind of presented on the last page, you know, of the RTOs or the people working with RTOs, are there any people that aren't following or haven't adopted any technology to improve their training or assessment processes? Can you see the results as they're coming in, David?
No, I can't see the results.
No, I can't. All right, well, we'll put you on the spot then. What's your best guess for what level of adoption we've got?
Well, I think if we asked this question a year ago, or perhaps a bit more than a year ago, we'd probably be somewhere around 50-50 would be my guess. I'm guessing right now, given the brave new world that we live in and have been for the last little while, I reckon you're probably looking about 95% will say yes, and 90% will say that they've adopted some form of technology.
Okay, well, we're a minute in, we'll share the results. Okay. Just get that to absorb. It's a pretty bloody good guess, really, David.
I should have stuck with my first time one with 95%, but yeah, I'll stick with my estimate of 90% and call it good enough.
Yeah, well, 95's pretty good, but yeah, I think within 5% is pretty good as well. Maybe you should buy a lottery ticket today. but yeah, I think that's yeah. I think there's definitely an element of the world's changed somewhat, but I think the availability of technology and you know the SaaS model, I guess, has made technology very accessible, very affordable, and you know very connectable. You know, there's integration solutions and you know connections and connectivity things that mean you know we don't have to have these kind of disconnected systems anymore. So I think it's an exciting time, really. But you know, I've had this conversation with you before, Dave, and I like to argue that you know any step on that ladder or that journey is going to give an RTO benefit, but there's obviously a downside to that. What's your experiences in terms of some of the solutions you see out there and how people have gone on with those?
Yeah, well, I'm inclined to be on your side. I guess I've always been a bit of a tech early adopter and a champion of using technology where it can actually be beneficial. Um, unfortunately, it's not always the case, but there's a whole range of things that I've seen people using, and I think this has probably changed a bit in the last 12 months, but over the last few years, you know, people sometimes say, oh yeah, we're doing all of our training and assessment online, when they're actually swapping PDFs via Dropbox or something similar, which is a step down the path. As you say, a step down the path is a start. But it's not really what I'd call e-learning or e-assessment or any of the e-words you might want to come up with. You know, right through to very sophisticated systems, usually a combination of an LMS and a student management system, and often a lot of other technology sitting in the background. That you know really does mean that the entire experience is done online. I think that's quite rare, and I think that it's become more common in this strange period we've just been in. But it'll be interesting to see what the next evolution of that is. Whether people will stick with those highly technical, highly kind of distance mode systems and operations, or whether there'll be some pulling back a little bit to try and perhaps take some of the things that are good about being more face to face and more touchy feely, not in a nasty way, but retaining the benefits of technology at the same time. I think we're at a really opportunity point for many RTOs in that space to work out what's worked for us, what hasn't, what do we keep, what do we stop, what do we get rid of.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, really, there, David. So thank you. I mean, from our perspective, we, as I say, 10 years ago or so, we'd be having conversations with people around, you know, the benefits of going online versus paper, and that's a pretty easy conversation to have. And you know, the benefits are very apparent and very clear and very tangible. But more and more so now, we're having conversations with what we'd refer to as kind of an educated buyer or someone with experience of using online technology in some way in their process. And those experiences tend to be, you know, I guess they wouldn't be speaking to us unless they were having some sort of challenges or issues with that technology, or see an opportunity with taking the next step down that journey. But we're certainly interfacing with prospects and people now that have got a lot better understanding of their requirements and a lot better understanding of some of the intricacies of tools and mechanisms and functions and features that they need to actually manage those assessment processes better, whether it's resource development, revision control, or deploying new changes, or whatever it might be. But we're certainly away from the space now where people don't know what they don't know, and they really, all they're thinking is, oh, well, we just need an assessment solution, and that's a submission workflow, and we've got completed assessments at the end of it. Well, it's a lot more than that. And as you know, through the standards, you know, assessment is a huge part of an RTO's operation. It's not just the activity where we gather evidence and award an outcome of it, but it's got a much broader meaning in a vocational context where we're consulting with industry, we're conducting validation, you know, we're maintaining policies and procedures, all these different things, and continuous improvement, all these different things that actually pull the requirements together.
Yeah.
We'll keep moving on, shall we?
Yeah.
I could keep gibbering on all day, so we'll try and get a feel now for what sort of solutions people are using. So we'll move on to the next poll and see what type of technologies people are using. And this might not be the most comprehensive list that we've got in the world, but it'll be interesting nonetheless. I think you're going to struggle with a prediction this time, David. What's going to be the majority from your perspective, do you think?
Yeah, I'm actually not even sure what the difference is between a generic LMS and a vet LMS. I guess there are some really targeted at the vet sector, but there are also a few that are perhaps more targeted at the higher ed sector, but are used in other contexts as well. I'm guessing probably vet LMS is where most people would go, or the majority of people, over the other things.
Yeah, right. Well, let's see how
What
that
do you
comes
think?
along.
You're good at asking for predictions. What's your prediction?
I've got the results in front of me. I
Oh,
can't.
right. Yeah.
Can't. I think it'll be about 47%. Yeah. Let's
Yeah.
give it a few more seconds. We've got 62%. I can't select multiple options now. I'm sorry about that. That's a good idea. It's supposed to be as well. Apologies for that. So we just hopefully got the dominant option from everyone. All right, got a couple more votes coming in. Okay. All right, let's share those results. So, yeah, the vocational LMS or online assessment and training solution seems to dominate there, which is again, you're on the money, David. And those Dropboxes and editable PDFs are still quite a big part of the market there in terms of who's doing what. Have you got any surprises there, do you think, David?
Yeah, it was a pretty easy thing to guess. I think that most people would be using a bespoke system or a system built for the sector. I was a little bit surprised by the number of people that are using the editable PDFs or Dropbox, Google Drive, etc. 28% of people using those sort of methods, which I guess maybe those are the people who are just now or just in the last little while adopting or being forced to adopt an online model, and perhaps dipping their toes in the water in the kind of with a low barrier, because it's quite easy to set up these systems and run your normal process of distributing and gathering assessment items with the minimum kind of cost, because the systems it's not only about the cost of buying a system, there's a configuration cost as well. So I wonder if maybe those people would go something better if they thought this was going to be long term for them, and maybe some of those are the ones that will be rushing to drop back to face right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fair point. I think there's definitely been a kind of catalyst to, obviously, with the current climate or the recent climate. And last year there was definitely a catalyst to get online quickly. What are some of the experiences that you kind of heard about or kind of got exposed to in terms of what people might have found with that technology or how that might have gone for people that you've spoken to out there, David?
Yeah, I think that in some ways, I guess the last 12 months have really accelerated the uptake of online learning and assessment, just to use the term in the broadest possible way. And I think in many cases, those are where people were forced to make that decision. It was either, I guess, go online or perish, largely, because you can't sit out for 12 months and not engage with your students and expect to have much of a business left at the end of that period. So I think if people were forced to do it, probably some took more encouragement than others, or perhaps were less willing than others. But what I have seen in a number of cases is people now looking back on that and going, "Oh, I wish I'd made a different choice." Now realizing that perhaps in some cases certainly, but perhaps more broadly than I've seen, actually starting to see some of the benefits of using these systems and thinking, well, if I'm going to continue using this, I wouldn't make the same choice again with the same system. And I think that's a sign of the times. I think it's a perfectly understandable thing, and I don't think anyone should be criticized for having made a decision which they were done almost literally with a gun against their head. and having to work very, very quickly. And I think it's really a real credit to the sector that it was able to pivot so quickly into that model, and with minimal disruption to students. But I have seen people who've now looking back and saying, oh, I'm not sure if I've made the right decision about the system I've chosen, about the way I've set up the system. I know that the RTO that I'm working for has had to make some changes to the configuration of their LMS, because they realized that when they configured it in a hurry, as it unfolded, it didn't quite work the way they expected to. I think that's the negative side of things that I've seen. But we see, you mentioned before, streamlined record keeping. You can see better oversight by management. I've been really pleased in my role with an RTO to be able to just look up on a report and see where all the students are at, what the attendance is, what the progression of students is, chop that data around to see, are there any patterns in that? Are particular classes not attending? Are particular courses not making progress? Are particular trainers having different progression rates for their students? Things like that. So I think there's really real opportunities there for managers to really understand what's going on in their RTO with these systems. And it's given the learners a lot more flexibility. It means you're not bound by the class times to undertake assessment tasks. A lot of those aren't particularly time sensitive. So they can do them outside class times, and you can use those class times to do more engagement with the learner. Of late, less face-to-face engagement, more virtual engagement, but still, it's meant some options and flexibility for both learners and the trainers and assessors.
Yeah, no, we've seen a lot of changes. It's been quite interesting actually. The clients that pivoted or engaged with this pretty quickly seem to do pretty well, and they grasped the situation pretty quickly and kind of had a good think about how they needed to do things differently and made changes to resources and got those into gear pretty quickly. So we had one client that used to have the trainers and assessors visit the trainees in the workplace and do those practical assessments, but they recognized very quickly that these travel restrictions weren't going to work. So they changed the resources very quickly so that they could actually use the supervisory people in the workplace that were always going to be there to actually gather that practical evidence for them. And based on an ASQA webinar that was on the other week, I think there's still concerns about practical assessment. Those requirements haven't changed, but just because it's a practical assessment doesn't mean the evidence has to be gathered by an assessor. So I thought that was quite an interesting point and concern that they raised, that those requirements haven't changed, but how you do it maybe needs to. We certainly saw the use of video increase by about fourfold, and the amount of video we were processing increased by about 4 times pre-COVID to post-COVID. So it was definitely a solution that people gravitated to. Okay, where are we up to? Recent trends then. Let's see what the next poll is. Oh, here we go. Let's see how people have found their transition to the digital experience. So I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience, as you said, David, that have made this transition to digital, and almost with a sink or swim scenario, really. I think it'd be interesting to see what kind of experience that's been for the people in the audience. Have they seen that as a positive thing, or it's just something that they've just had to get through, or how's the outcome felt or been for the people in the audience? Any predictions, David? Just to put you on the spot again.
Yeah, this is not fair. I think okay is probably where most people are going to sit. I think I think probably everyone has had some level of mixed experience with this rolling out. So I think there'll be very few people who would say great, simply because the way that people have had to roll this out hasn't been ideal, and that has inevitably led to perhaps some glitches along the way. I don't know, but I don't think many people would say it's been very poor. Some of the students might say that if they're struggling and not willing to engage with the trainer in a way that has to be driven by them to some extent. But I'm saying that the biggest group is going to be in the middle there.
Yeah.
People will always sit on the fence anyway if they're not sure.
Yeah, right. Interesting point that Ray has brought up, and it'd be an interesting poll to see if he'll return to face-to-face. And we actually did a webinar the other week. I forget what the subject was now. It was only a couple of weeks ago as well. But we asked the audience, what was their kind of, that was the subject. We were saying, well, a lot of people come to us and say, I need an LMS. Can you show me your LMS? And we kind of understand their requirements, and really they're not after a digital or an e-learning solution. They're after an assessment solution, and they want a solution that will enable them to streamline their evidence gathering and maybe share learning content or what have you. But the learning mode that suits their RTO best isn't necessarily this kind of traditional e-learning kind of model. And it surprised us. It was a very small number of the people in the audience. I think there was less than a third of the people in the audience, although they were using online technology, were actually using e-learning in the traditional sense. And a lot of people were using the technology to do face-to-face in a digital context. So virtual face-to-face rather than your traditional face-to-face. So it will be interesting to see who moves back to full face-to-face. We were just chatting the other day, weren't we, David, about how it is different to kind of engage the learner base in that kind of in that digital context.
Yeah, and I was saying that the RTO I work for was, well, we've got a different driver, which is overseas students and the requirement to deliver face-to-face to them. But even if it wasn't for that requirement, we would be doing what we're doing at the beginning of the next term, which is going back to full face-to-face training. So all of our classes will go back to being face-to-face. It'll be great to see students back in the rooms. It's a bit eerie to walk past a row of classrooms and there's no one in there but a teacher. But we have found that the results of our learners are not as good. And it's particular to our learner group. They're not as positive as they were when they're engaged, or in some cases not engaged through an online environment. But we will be sticking with using our LMS and using a full digital model for assessment because it works very well. And then we talked about the benefits earlier. It works very well in that sense, but the actual transfer of knowledge and the supporting of the students we've found is better face-to-face. So we will be going back to that kind of mixed model, I guess.
Yeah, it is kind of a different skill set almost, though, isn't it? There's a lot of RTOs that made this jump very quickly, and I think it's easy to take for granted how familiar we are with your traditional face-to-face practices. But when you've suddenly got to engage with a room full of students, whether virtual or whatever the digital context for that, it's suddenly a very different process of monitoring, tracking. It's very easy to present to a classroom and see who's switching off and tune in on those people or ask those people questions or what have you. But it's a very different skill set, I think. I'm sure a lot of people have struggled with that.
Yeah, I agree. And I think sorry about the pronunciation, Ewade talks about doing their practicals through face-to-face. And I just did want to be clear that we are doing that because, again, you can do some practical tasks online through video, etc., but it's just not as efficient in that it's much easier and quicker for both sides to actually do some of those things face-to-face. So it is a bit of a blended model, but yeah, it's the engagement that we found that is missing in the online, and that I think is partly the participants and their ability to engage in that different model.
Yeah, sure. Well, again, another interesting poll. So it's good to see that most people seem to be having a good experience, and a few with a great experience. And unfortunately, there's a few with a bit of an underwhelming experience. But good to see that there's no one in the very poor category. So I'll take that as a positive aspect, I guess. I mean, from our perspective, we've done hundreds of implementations over the years, and it's like you said earlier, David, you've got to resource a system. It's not just the cost of a system, but you've got to implement it, and you've got to, feed it and fuel it and run it properly. And I think it's probably something smaller RTOs with the best intents and purposes maybe underestimate sometimes. And we've changed our implementation support practices considerably, really, to help guide people through a process and generate better outcomes. But we'll jump on to the next poll, and we'll see where people found the biggest challenges in terms of how they've adopted technology. Let's see your biggest challenges. So again, one more poll here, just to see what people struggled with most in terms of going digital. Was it resource digitization, getting your learning or assessment content and getting it into a system? Was it training and helping your staff adapt to new processes? Was it alignment of the product to your actual requirements? Did you find there was feature gaps or things that you required that weren't quite there? Were there procedural aspects that your team struggled with, to transition from a paper process to a new digital process? Was it guidance on actually implementing it effectively and getting through that process, or was it just as simple as being time poor and not having the human resources to get across that? You know what I'm going to ask you now, don't you, David?
Yeah, you do. I'm thinking ahead. I actually think this will be, it's probably difficult to analyze what these outcomes will be, because I think it's going to depend a huge amount on the system people are using. I suspect that if people are using a Moodle or a Moodle-based system, they're probably going to be putting down implementation support and guidance, because it's an enormous amount of work to configure that system. Very powerful, but it doesn't do a lot for you. You've got to do a lot of the work offline and then enter it into the system.
Yeah.
I guess there'd be some of these people that saying the product fit is a problem, and that's the people that perhaps haven't had the opportunity to make the choices they might have if they'd had more access to information. Because of course, while people were rushing to move everything online, they were not in a position to kind of liaise with suppliers and have demonstrations and go and see other people about what they're doing. It was all had to be done in a vacuum almost. So there'd be quite a few people in that space too, I think.
Yeah. We'll just end that poll and share that. And I'll apologise to everyone in the audience. Although we've said should be multiple choices available, we've edited the poll and you can only select one. But it seems resource digitization, getting your actual content into the system, seems like one of the biggest challenges for getting across the line. Let's see what Amanda's saying. In my experience, helping learners get used to the online space has also been a big challenge. It seems to be a huge learning curve, getting used to an LMS, organising documents, or just manoeuvring their computers. Anyone else encountered similar? That's an interesting point. Thanks for bringing that up, Amanda. Have you got any experience in that regard, David, with where you've been recently?
Not directly, because I haven't been a trainer and assessor for more years than I care to remember. But yeah, I do acknowledge that can be a real issue, and it's not just a boomers or silent generation thing. There are many people who we would traditionally, in a general sense, we would think are extremely familiar with technology, and early adopters of social media and the latest smartphone and all the rest of it. But a lot of those more, I guess, work type applications using a spreadsheet, using Word, to actually be able to generate the assessment items is something that people would struggle with, and having to upload things in a specific way with specific names and things like that. We all know that millennials are often not very good at following instructions. But I'm just kidding. Some many millennials in the audience, no doubt. Certainly men are difficulty following instructions. I know that. But I think there's lots of reasons, but I think, there's certainly a barrier to overcome for learners, getting them kind of up to speed with the LMS or the system that you're using.
Yeah, and I think we can easily get kind of dazzled by the lights these days, and was it raised a good point. Someone at Skills Education said it's a common misconception that because people use social media, they're okay with tech for learning. But you know, the quality of the user interfaces for some of the apps we use every day is just phenomenal. And you know, there's millions of dollars put into making these experiences really intuitive and simple. And then in contrast, we've got these amazing learning systems that are out there that are thanks, Michelle, that are, you know, very feature rich. But I can imagine it's almost overwhelming, you know, because there could be that many features and alarms and lights and things going off that it kind of takes you away from the process that you should be going on, which is getting through your course content and getting through your assessment. So, but yeah, quite a broad range of kind of experiences there, and I don't think there's any hard and fast trend there that we could say, well, you know, that's the biggest problem is really here.
Yeah, Rob, I think Mel's made a good point too, that the success is related to confidence and preparation of trainers. And I think that's perhaps something that can sometimes get ignored in this space. They get the meat in the sandwich in some ways. You know, an organization rolls out the system that the students kind of get to dive in and learn how to use it. And they're probably given webinars or whatever to show them how to use it.
Yeah,
But it really is important that the trainers are more familiar with the system than the students are. They're obviously going to be, in a sense, ad hoc tech support for some of the students some of the time. So
yeah,
yeah, I think it's really important that you develop your trainer's capacity for the system beyond what you would expect a student to have, to make sure that they're actually kind of ahead of the curve and able to help.
yeah, absolutely. And Deb's just asked if anyone's got any experiences using, and I'm assuming that means augmented reality for assessment. I know I'll jump in there first. I know from our perspective, we've investigated all sorts of different VR tech or options that could be used. And they are very expensive technologies. Unless you've got a huge volume of learners, it's very difficult to kind of justify custom designed VR or AR sort of technology. It'd be very expensive to develop. So we identified some very simple ways of using, you know, 360 videos as kind of VR interactions that were actually quite powerful and quite simple and very simple technology to embed in an LMS using HTML packages. But I don't know if you've got any experience there, David, or I think keep it simple tends to be my perspective on these sorts of things. But
Yeah, there's been talk of this for some years now about the next great thing in vet in terms of particularly assessment. And this is, you know, there are real benefits for some groups of students. We should never forget people living in rural and remote areas who are faced with all sorts of challenges just accessing vet. Those sort of tools could be really, really helpful for people like that. My feeling is that it's still a little bit of an emerging technology, and in the kind of mainstream vet sector, probably we're not quite there yet. I think the cost of the technology and the you know the support that it needs in terms of the computer systems you need to use and the some of these challenges. I think it will one day it will be what vet is, but that day is not today.
yeah, no, I would agree with that. It's just, you know, it's just too expensive to create those experiences, I think, in unless you've got a huge volume of learners going through so you can justify a smaller cost per learner. I think it'd be inhibitive at the moment, but there is technology out there to create experiences that are a bit more simple and a bit more easy to reproduce without top end technology. And Vimala has just kind of highlighted, you know, chunks of information embedded with video, links, documents, and assessment all built together is really effective. So that's a good experience. I think we've had some good engagement from everyone. And what's Shannon saying? Hi, Shannon. Haven't seen you, missed you at VELG this year, but would observing a learning responding in an AR environment be acceptable for assessment? I suppose it's as long as it's a simulated environment, does it matter if it's a physical environment, or as long as the simulation ticks the box in the unit requirements, would that be enough, David?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's no different to any other thing. And I don't see there's any difference really, assuming you can verify that you're observing the correct person and that authenticity question is addressed. I don't think there's any difference whether you look, you can, I mean, one of the advantages of AR is you can often do it in real time. So you
Yeah,
can actually see what the learner sees. Uh, Either that or a recording. I don't see any problem with that if your assessment process itself is sound. I don't think it matters whether you're looking at a video or looking at the student face to face.
yeah, I would certainly agree with that. So we'll have to keep moving. So we'll ask you the $1,000,000 question now. Then it seems to have got every other prediction right, David. So what does the future look like? Should I buy a lottery ticket? What do you think? What do you think? We should be focused on, or the next 10 years will look like in kind of EdTech for the vocational space. Where's the smart money going?
Well, I don't know. It's such a difficult time in all of our lives, I think, to predict what's going to happen tomorrow. Never mind in 5 to 10 years. Yeah, my thinking is it's a continuum. We've talked a little bit about AR. I think that'll come to the fore as a really useful tool in some circumstances, and we'll see them more used more often. But I think I don't, the sector doesn't really change that fast. It feels like there's lots of change, and certainly things like standards change. It seems like every day. It's been 5 years, but I guess we're still getting used to them sometimes. But
Yeah,
what I would hope is that, in a general sense, that the rate of change slows down a little bit, so people can actually focus their time on investing in technology, investing in tools, with the certainty that they're going to be able to use them for a reasonable period of time. Whatever you're investing in technology, it's going to cost you money. And I think some people are nervous about investing in technology because they feel like the sector keeps changing so much all the time. Training packages change, everything else changes, and it is going to up the cost of them keeping up to date. I would like to think that people could get some more certainty over the next few years in terms of being able to invest in not only technology, but technology specifically, because it does cost so much when you have to upgrade it. But I think we'll see the move to online stabilize over the next couple of years. There'll be quite a number of providers who will forge ahead with that, and there's systems such as Cloud Assess and others which will be able to help them along that journey. There'll be some who will fall back to, I'd say fall back in a derogatory term, but we'll go back to what works for them. More face-to-face, but I think what we'll see mostly is technology being used in concert with more traditional methods. So as I talked about, what we're doing in the RTO I work for is, picking out the things that work, where the technology really works, where it benefits the students, where it benefits the organization, and keeping the traditional models where they work better for students. But I think that's where I think technology will be working towards in the future. It's a long way of saying this, but I think we'll see products emerging or morphing into things that support the traditional classroom delivery, that take some of those kind of mind-numbing administrivia tasks away from trainers and assessors, that deal with those sort of things that machines are really good at, and let the human beings do the things they're really good at, the nuanced things, the things where emotional intelligence is important, the actual face-to-face interaction. So I think we'll see more tools to support face-to-face delivery, where at the moment it's very split. You've either got tools for online delivery or you've got face-to-face delivery. I think you'll start to see those two merge, with tools to help trainers and assessors in their day-to-day work in their classrooms.
yeah, and I guess I've got a couple of comments on there, and you've said it before. There's a lot of RTOs that have gone online recently, but there's a value to doing online assessment, even if you do it in a classroom, and you're eliminating that paper. Then we often have conversations with people, and there's kind of a perception that online always means that you do it remotely, but there's a huge benefit to maintaining technology that eliminates those paperwork processes and gets rid of those repetitive tasks that don't really contribute to a learner's experience. It's just administrative functions that trainers and assessors or people within the RTOs need to do. And we spoke about this the other day. I remember David, but you know, I like to think that no one really gets in the educational space, or people tend to get in the educational space because they're passionate about making a difference to people's lives. I don't know a trainer and assessor that got into training and assessment because they're passionate about paperwork, but it's a necessary evil, unfortunately, and it's part of the job. And if we can get people away from that paperwork because computers can manage that better, and then that allows trainers and assessors or the relevant people to better engage with or provide a better learner experience, then I think that's just going to improve quality across the sector and drive better outcomes, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree about trainers and assessors. And I think generally people in the vet sector, you know, it's an industry which is characterized by people who want to make a difference in other people's lives, none more so than trainers and assessors. I just note the only prediction you've made in this session, Rob, was that we'd finish early. So I see you didn't do very well on that. But because we don't have much time, and as Ignatius just made a really good point or a really good question about how do you manage the risk of plagiarism, which I think is a greater risk in a remote environment. Don't really have time to answer it here, but if you're a member of VALG, I did a webinar with VALG a couple of weeks ago on this very topic, and you can find the recording of that on their website.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. Well, in a minute, we'll just open up the floor for questions, and there's been some great questions and information coming through, so we'll pour through that. Where are we going to catch up with you next, David? I know you've got a couple of things on the cards with VALG in coming months.
Yeah, I do a regular session with VALG, which is only available for VALG members, and if you are a member of VALG, you'll be aware of their compliance chat service. If you're not, it's on their website. The next thing I've got actually booked at the moment, I've had a bit of a flurry of engagements the last few weeks, but VALG conference in September. Is it September or October? September, I think.
September, I think, yeah.
Yeah, it's local for me, so not much chance of me being locked out of the border to get there. But yeah, a couple of people have commented on, you know, it's become a really big event for the sector, and I think as much as anything, a real opportunity for people to catch up, and really looking forward to meeting everyone again in September.
Yeah,
crossed fingers, border provisions allowing.
Yeah, well, that's local for us as well, so it's an easy gig for us to get to. But I agree, it's always a good event, and you see, you know, same people time and time, and get to catch up and get a feel for what's going on in the industry. So I'll recommend it for anyone that can get there. But it'll be an interesting year this year. We'll hopefully have a good turnout and see how we go. Okay, well, I'll open the floor for questions. Thanks everyone for coming along today. We do send out a survey in the email, the follow-up email with the video and the content links and all that sort of stuff. So please help us do a better job with these webinars by giving us a couple of minutes to answer that survey. Other than that, thanks everyone for your time and coming along today. It's been really good engagement actually from the audience, so that was a great session. Thanks, David, for your time for making the session work. And then, yeah, final thing is keep safe and thoughts with everyone down in New South Wales, and hoping that everyone gets through these recent tough times that we're going through. So any questions, please feel free to drop them into chat before we round off. I think the appointment was scheduled till 2 o'clock Queensland time, so 45 minutes was the target in theory, but
it's such an interesting topic, Rob. You know, I could talk for another 2 hours and still not cover everything. But
yeah, likewise. You know, it's obviously a subject we're passionate about. But let's see how we go.
I think we've answered everyone's questions.
Well, here we go. If you have a crystal ball, when do you think the government will demand Cricos goes back face-to-face being mandatory?
Yeah, I did type something in there on that, Rob. I don't have any idea, to be honest, but
Yeah.
I would think it would be quite soon. I don't think there's any kind of widespread reason why we should now be concentrating on online for overseas students or forced to do that.
Yeah.
As I said, the college I work for, we're making the jump in a week and a half when our next term starts, largely because we think we're going to be told to shortly anyway.
Yeah.
But also, we think there are benefits for it. So I think you make your own decisions, but we'd rather make our own choice about when we start to do that and be able to plan for it than be told
Yeah.
you got to do this next week.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously it's imminent, and hopefully that'll be a good time to be focusing on what greener pastures look like. Just another question from Shannon Hall. Ask us 2021 focus on online learning. Any insights? There was a great webinar the other week from VETR that was part of the Digital Learning Day event. So if you're not connected to VETR's platform, I'd recommend getting on there and seeing if you can get access to that. That was a great webinar and some information straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So there was some good information. I forget specifically, Shannon, but there's definitely a focus on it. Definitely concerns about practical assessment with the online review. There's online learning is a common term, but it encompasses the whole training and assessment space, I think, and there's often an inference that it's just the learning space. So have a look for that, and I'm sure you'll get some insight that will hopefully give you some value there, Shannon. And I'll look forward to catching you at Velg. All right, David, we'll give everyone a few minutes while they're saying goodbye, but thanks again, everyone, for coming along. It's been a great session, and yeah, we'll look forward to catching you in the next one. And I think the next one in a few months, we've got some of the crew from year 13 to give us some insight into their youth studies and how they engage with those demographics and some of the information that they've uncovered. So that should be a good session as well.
Rob, thanks for having me on. It's been an interesting conversation. I wish it could be a bit longer, but people have got work to do, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And their bosses will be looking at their watch and saying, what are you still doing there? But yeah, I look forward to maybe some future conversations. And thank you, everyone, for attending. It's your time's valuable, and we really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to come and listen to us.
Great. Thanks again, David. Have a great week. And yeah, I'll look forward to a coffee soon.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
See you.